Good evening, good morning. I don't know what time of the days were you guys watching the video. My name is Ilya Bezuglov. It's my friend and partner Carl. And we're gonna be covering a whole bunch of different self-defense techniques and concepts. What self-defense needs to be, what self-defense can be, what cannot be, and what important is what's the risk and litigations that come with the self-defense if you're being attacked. The cool thing with us, I come from a law enforcement tactical background. I've been a cop for 27 years, been doing jiu-jitsu since 2009. Carl's expertise is actually being a professional fighter, training fighters, training civilians on the self-defense. So when you get those two entities together, now we're gonna cover this whole aspect, because when Carl trained, let's say, jiu-jitsu fighters, I mean, they think about, hey, what's the most effective, how we can learn it quick, and how we can apply it in the real world. Then boring me come along and I was like, okay, well, let's start thinking about the civil litigations. Is that going to be within the policy of this organization? What is going to look like in court, and so on and so forth. So when we developed the curriculum, this is the perfect marriage, so to speak, that will bring completely two different ends to the perspective and making sure that we covered from every single angle. Carl?
Yeah, I completely agree. When a lot of times when you have strictly a grappling background, it gives you a lot of options, but you have to make sure that it conforms again to the company that you're dealing with or the specifications. And also, you have to take into consideration how an untrained person, if they can get harmed severely by application of certain techniques. So you have to really, there's many ways to apply, and there's a variety of techniques that you can apply. But you have to look at with the filter of applying the ones that do not lead to catastrophic injury, for even if a person's trying to assault you, but can control them so you're not hurt, they're not significantly hurt, and you can remedy this situation in a non-violent manner.
Great, that's exactly what it is. Yes, there are some foundational things that are kind of cornerstones for techniques, but everything else is fluid. The environment is fluid. It can be warehouse, it can be on the streets, it can be in the car. So we approach every single different company's different environment with different techniques. So let's talk about the situations when there is a confrontation. In what we call a legal world, there's three levels of confrontation. Especially if you're dealing in a secure environment, let's say it's a shopping center, someone's stealing a product, you have to deal with some sort of incident that can escalate or can de-escalate depending on different approaches. So the first level is the subject is going to be completely cooperative. It's going to be a verbal, maybe a little bit of conflict, but it never goes physical. That's what we all desire. Unfortunately, not always happens. The second level is a passive aggressive, meaning that I'm trying to get him in custody, or he's not really fighting, but he's not letting me do that. So I have to only use the level of physical force that is reasonable for that situation. I can't do, and most of the time, I cannot go boom and just apply force that is going to be completely unreasonable to any normal, reasonable person. And now we're dealing with a third level, which is full-on physical resistance that can escalate all the way to the deadly force, meaning that he goes from punches, kicks, and everything else, takedowns, to weapons. So the first two levels of resistance very often can be negotiated just with de-escalation, the verbal techniques, interpersonal communication based on emotional intelligence, based on being mindful and convincing, and use everything, empathy, language, and I have a very detailed video that covers de-escalation stage of it. The second degree is, now we're dealing with the guy who is passive resistant, but keep in mind, the passive resistance can go to actual active resistance very, very fast. The moment the skin to skin contact, a lot of times it's going to go to a physical confrontation. So we're going to show a couple of techniques how to deal with passive resistance, take them in the controlled environment, take them in the custody, take them in detention, depending on what you guys dealing with. If it's just a civil confrontation and he goes passive resistance, and you're an employee, then boom. At this point, I would separate completely. I would call the authorities. I would let it deal with the situation without getting in the physical confrontation. But again, if you're a security guard or you need to take this person into control custody, we'll show you how to deal with that. Okay, so the first, as I mentioned, we're gonna deal with, let's say I'm a security guard, loss prevention officer. I got a shoplifter. He's being detained. He's not free to go, but I don't want to be dealing with him in the middle of the store with a whole bunch of people pointing the phones or creating this whole mass drama. He's not fighting me, but he's not letting go, and he doesn't want to go with the program. So I have to use reasonable force to take him to detention facility or just away from this, because I don't know how many people involved. I need to take him to a safe facility to deal with whatever the citation, whatever needs to be done after. And we're going to show that technique. It's called shoulder lock. In law enforcement world, it's called figure 4 lock. In normal world, it's called kimura. And it's a really good controlling technique to move someone without actually employing any weapons or employing any strikes. It's all control and control hold manipulations. Hand on top of your head. Move forward with it. And the last one is a physical confrontation. This is the one that I'll let Carl be a good guy and I'm going to be a bad guy, just to show you that effectiveness of technique versus size and strength. And the physical confrontation, obviously, we're going to go with example of, if I see, honestly, and I can be induced with alcohol, drugs, or whatever, and I see the guys that I feel that I'm superior in size and strength, and I'm going to go with just normal punches and strikes. He, especially coming from a grappling background, it's way easier for him, instead of going the boxing match with me, take me on the ground, control me on the ground, and wait until the help arrives or authority comes in, and we can demonstrate how we can do that safely. So now we're going to show technique. Now we are in a full physical confrontation. As I say, I'm going to be bad guy. We'll try to take his head off, and he will be dealing with me based on his skills and at the same time taking environment into consideration. Doesn't want to get in the boxing match, and just want to control me with a reasonable force necessary, and take me into position when he can control and wait for authorities to deal with this physical confrontation. But the second question is our explanation on how to use weapons by the security guards or by the store loss prevention officers during the confrontation, and what's the legal statutes, what's the legal limitations. And again, it goes state by state. There are some little statutes and policies that go separately in different jurisdictions. One of the things that, as I say, being an expert in the use of force testimonies for both defense and the prosecutors, I've seen plenty of attacks. The number one thing they go to is the moment there is a use of force incident, they will go and they will review the business policy on the use of force. That's one of the things. I developed quite a few of them. If that's a need for me to review and kind of bulletproof the use of force policy that we have, we can absolutely do that. The second thing is there is the federal case law. It covers police officers, but it's used a lot of times even in civilian circles because it covers the definition of reasonable force. It's a Graham versus Connor. It's a very old, relatively old case law. It's federal case law, so it covers the entire United States. And that one explains what is reasonable force. And I'm not going to go into legal explanations. Definitely going to be part of a training we'll do. It's going to be a classroom training, but that one is just basically a kind of cornerstone of used by both defense and the prosecution to define what reasonable force is. When it comes to weaponry, I'm assuming that there's going to be a spectrum of weapons, anything from some sort of tear gas or mace or that equipment. I don't know if there's a taser or any electronic defensive devices available, called stun guns, even though I don't really like that name, and the firearms. And we offer trainings on every single one of them. With firearms, I'll be honest, I'm very selective who we train with the firearms because it's obviously a lot of liability, but it's definitely on the table. I've been a firearm instructor for 22 years, and I have a team of firearm instructors, everything from the rifles, shotguns, and the handguns. When and how to use them, and again, that's going to be it's a huge 2-3 hour video on its own. It's going to be, as I say, definition of reasonable versus your fear for your safety, right? And that's something that we can definitely put together, and depending on what weaponry is used by your company. And the last question was what to do if employees being threatened. And I'm assuming it's a threat of physical harm or life. We can definitely go, as I say, it's a part of de-escalation training. We can go to a threat of, verbal assault, perceived threat of physical harm, even though it might not be there. But I'm assuming that that's a question that is, hey, the physical harm is happening, and the physical harm can go all the way to, great bodily injury or even death. That's where our self-defense, that's actually me training cops most of my life. Is I'm going to be relying heavily on Carl, because he trains from little kids to old people, and the concept that he teaches is not just self-defense techniques, but self-defense techniques based on on effectiveness, on that you don't need to have too much strength. I mean, strength's always a plus, but if you're relying on your strength, there's always going to be someone who's stronger, younger, bigger, and it can only go so far. So I'm actually going to present that question to Carl: what to do if there is a physical harm or even great bodily injury or death is being threatened to an employee.
So, in a lot of cases, you can disengage, but if you're dealing with someone who's threatening to murder you, and especially if they're approaching you, there's ways to take them down, catastrophic ways to restrain them, because that is illegal to threaten to murder a person. You can take them down, you can control them in a manner where they can't really move, they cannot, one, harm you or the person that they're threatening, and they also can't really harm themselves. And the best part about this is that it's able to be utilized by people who are small, people who are big, people who are heavier set, people who are a lot thinner. It doesn't super matter about their body type, because the techniques are very, very efficient in controlling the person in a catastrophic manner, where you can restrain them, and then you can pass them off to proper security or police officers if they're coming in to assist in this particular situation. So it's all based on control, utilizing your weight, utilizing the position where it's very physically difficult to get out there.
And that's basically a very short presentation, short video of a very comprehensive curriculums that we develop for several different companies, that we develop for different needs. And it's and on top of that, we actually have a train the trainer curriculums that we can come in, and we're going to get your use of force instructors, train them, certify them through us, and then maybe review the curriculum every 6-7 months. But this way they can be local, and they can be everyday liaison and training your company employees, as I say, on a daily basis.